Marcus had been wandering the overworld for what felt like months. His diamond pickaxe worn smooth from countless mining expeditions, and his inventory perpetually full of cobblestone and regret. He was what the villagers whispered about in their trading halls. A nomad, a drifter, someone who couldn't settle down even when presented with the perfect plains biome and unlimited resources. But Marcus wasn't searching for the perfect home. He was searching for something far more elusive, the legendary Whispering Beacon. The stories varied depending on which village you visited. Some claimed it was a beacon that could grant any wish. Others insisted it was cursed, driving anyone who found it to madness. The most intriguing tale came from an elderly librarian villager in a desert temple who spoke of a beacon that didn't emit light, but sound. Ancient melodies that supposedly revealed the location of every stronghold, every dungeon, every hidden treasure in the world. Marcus had dismissed it as village folklore until he'd stumbled upon something that changed everything. 3 weeks ago, while mining in a particularly deep ravine, his pickaxe had broken through into a hidden chamber. Inside, carved into obsidian walls, were symbols that seemed to shift and dance in his torchlight. At the center of the room sat a single block. Not quite obsidian, not quite crying obsidian, but something in between that hummed with an otherworldly frequency. When Marcus had placed his hand on it, he'd heard it, a faint melody, so beautiful and haunting that it had brought tears to his eyes. But more importantly, he'd seen a vision. A massive beacon sitting atop a mountain of glass, surrounded by floating islands and singing with that same ethereal tune. Now, as he crested yet another hill in the extreme hills biome, Marcus felt his compass spinning wildly. He'd crafted it specifically to point toward lodestones, but ever since touching that strange block, it had been behaving erratically, sometimes pointing in completely impossible directions. Up toward the sky, or straight down through bedrock. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, the needle was steady, pointing toward a mountain peak that seemed to shimmer against the starlit sky. As Marcus climbed higher, the very air around him began to change. The usual sounds of the night, the groaning of zombies, the hiss of creepers, the rattling of skeletons, gradually faded, until an unusual silence blanketed the mountainside. Even his own footsteps seemed muffled, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When he looked back down the mountain, he realized with a chill that no hostile mobs were following him. In fact, he couldn't see any mobs at all. The path grew stranger as he ascended. Blocks of glass began appearing between the stone, first just a few scattered cubes, then entire veins running through the mountain like crystalline arteries. The glass wasn't crafted. It was natural, formed by some process Marcus couldn't begin to understand. Inside some of the larger glass formations, he could see shapes moving, dark silhouettes that looked almost like trapped endermen. But they never teleported, never moved beyond slow, deliberate gestures that seemed almost like dancing. When Marcus finally reached the summit, his breath caught in his throat. The entire mountaintop had been transformed into a vast platform of seamlessly fused glass blocks, so perfectly smooth they reflected the night sky like a dark mirror. At the center of this impossible structure stood the beacon from his vision, but seeing it in person made him realize how inadequate that glimpse had been. The beacon was massive, easily 20 blocks tall and 10 blocks wide, constructed from materials Marcus had never seen before. The base appeared to be made from blocks that shifted between diamond and emerald, never quite settling on either. The beacon itself pulsed, not with light, but with waves of that same haunting melody he'd heard in the underground chamber. Each pulse sent ripples across the glass platform, and with each ripple, Marcus could hear something new. Whispered coordinates, half-remembered legends, the locations of villages he'd never visited. But he wasn't alone on the platform. Standing between Marcus and the beacon was a figure that made his skin crawl. It appeared to be an enderman, but wrong in ways that defied explanation. Its usual black skin had been replaced by the same shifting material as the beacon's base, and instead of the typical particle effects that surrounded Enderman, this creature was surrounded by tiny, floating musical notes that sparkled like stars before fading away. Most unsettling of all, it was looking directly at Marcus, something Enderman never did unless provoked. The creature didn't attack. Instead, it gestured toward the beacon with one elongated arm, then pointed at Marcus, then back at the beacon. The meaning was clear. Marcus was being invited to approach. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to dig straight down through the glass platform if necessary. But the melody from the beacon was growing stronger, more insistent, and with it came a compulsion he couldn't resist. As Marcus walked across the glass platform, his reflection walked beneath him, but it wasn't quite right. His reflection moved a fraction of a second behind his actual movements, creating a disorienting effect that made him feel like he was walking through a dream. The Enderman creature backed away as he approached, never taking its eyes off him, continuing its strange gestures that seemed almost like a form of worship. When Marcus finally reached the beacon, the melody became so intense, he could feel it vibrating in his bones. He placed both hands on its surface and immediately understood the terrible truth. The beacon wasn't just revealing the locations of treasures and strongholds, it was showing him every choice he'd ever made, every path he'd taken, every world he'd generated and abandoned in his endless search for something he could never quite name. But more than that, it was showing him futures. Infinite branches of possibility spreading out like the roots of a world tree. In some futures, he built great cities and ruled over vast kingdoms. In others, he became a hermit, living alone in mushroom islands and speaking only to the mushrooms. In still others, he fell into lava, was blown up by creepers, or simply logged out one day and never returned. The Enderman creature stepped closer, and Marcus realized it wasn't guarding the beacon. It was trapped by it, just like the shadowy figures in the glass. It had been another wanderer once, another seeker who had found this place and been overwhelmed by the infinite weight of possibility. The beacon showed everything, but knowing everything was a burden no mind could bear. Marcus felt the same fate beginning to claim him. The melody was growing louder, more complex, revealing not just his world, but countless others. Servers he'd never joined, seeds he'd never generated, adventures he'd never taken. His reflection in the glass platform began to lag further behind, and he realized with growing horror that it was becoming more real, while he was becoming more like the trapped figures in the mountain. But then, in a moment of clarity born from sheer desperation, Marcus did something the beacon hadn't predicted. Instead of trying to absorb all the knowledge it offered, instead of attempting to see every possible future, he focused on just one thing: the memory of that first night he'd spent in Minecraft, huddled in a dirt hut, terrified of the monsters outside, but exhilarated by the infinite possibilities ahead. He pulled his hands away from the beacon and began to run. The glass platform cracked beneath his feet as he sprinted toward the mountain's edge. Behind him, the Enderman creature let out a sound like breaking glass, mixed with the sadness of a disc playing backward. The beacon's melody became discordant, angry, as if it couldn't understand why anyone would choose uncertainty over omniscience. Marcus didn't look back as he leapt off the platform into the night sky. He fell through clouds, through darkness, through possibilities he'd never explore, and futures he'd never see. When he finally landed in a lake at the mountain's base, the beacon's song had faded to nothing more than a whisper in the wind. As he swam to shore, Marcus realized his compass was pointing in a single steady direction again, not toward any mystical destination, but simply north. He'd spent so long searching for the ultimate discovery that he'd forgotten the joy of simply discovering. The whispering beacon might have shown him everything, but everything included the knowledge that some mysteries were better left unsolved. Marcus wrung out his clothes, checked his inventory, and began walking north. Somewhere ahead lay new biomes to explore, new caves to mine, new adventures to stumble into. He'd never find another beacon like the one on the mountain, but that was perfectly fine. After all, the best treasures were the ones you discovered by accident, not the ones that revealed themselves all at once. Behind him, the glass mountain stood silent against the stars, its beacon dark, waiting for the next wanderer who believed that knowing everything was better than experiencing anything.